Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here on YouTube, and welcome to another Friday review. Today I am reviewing not only the 23rd studio album from Saxon, but it is also their very first covers album. It is Inspirations, which is this right here, and it was released on March 19th, which was this past Friday, through Silver Lining Music. So, when it comes to Inspirations, it is, again, like I said, it's the very first covers album, and it was recorded at least through mostly of last year at the Brockfield Hall, which somewhere in England. It could be, I think, owned by Biff Byford for all we know. But it is also right now, I guess, since most of the last couple or several albums from Saxon were all produced by Andy Sneap, this is the one that has been at least produced by Biff Byford himself. Again, this could have also came out of the inspiration from, of course, off the heels of him producing his own solo album, which was School of Hard Knocks, which I still haven't got around to. But who knows, there could be some I don't know, wrong facts there. So if you can fact check me on whether or not he produced his own album as well, again, leave that in the comments section below. I could have searched that up since I'm on Metal Archives for at least certain other things, for other little information. But you know what? I don't feel like doing all of that right now. I didn't want to. I don't want to waste any other time. So without wasting any more time, let's get into my review of Inspirations, the 23rd and only right now, or just first, covers album from Saxon. It is Inspirations. Alright, so before I really get into any of my thoughts on this covers album here from Saxon, let's do a track listing rundown. We've got about 11 songs here, and it all clocks in at 36 minutes and 21 seconds. Wow, probably the shortest Saxon album since some of the 80s material. Wow, very shocking in that regard there, or at least in that department. Alright, so these 11 songs are, we got, again, Painted Black, which is their cover of the Rolling Stones classic, Immigrant Song, which is their cover of the Led Zeppelin classic, Paperback Rider, which is a Beatles cover, Evil Woman, which is a Crow cover, and I'll definitely talk a bit more about that in this review, Stone Free, which is a Jimi Hendrix Experience cover, a Bomber, which is a classic Motorhead cover, Speed King, classic Deep Purple cover, The Rocker, a Thin Lizzy cover, Hold the Line, a Toto cover, Problem Child, a Acdc cover, and of course, See My Friends, which is a The Kinks cover. So there you go. There is your 11 songs. So your 11 cover songs from 11 bands. So where do I completely begin? When it comes to covers albums from a lot of artists, sometimes I can either be hit or miss, but there has been some ones that are usually looked pretty fondly. I mean, some people definitely liked Undisputed Attitude from Slayer. Many people also like the Garage Day stuff from Metallica, you know, and even some of the Origins albums from Ace Frehley. So there's at least some decent cover albums that many people really do enjoy. But sometimes they're not always going to be everybody's cup of tea. But I think with Saxon here, this was, I think, the whole idea in mind, since they were recording this all during, while they were being locked down in the old pandemic and all of that. This was probably one of the things they just decided to just do, and also thought about their fan base in general. Again, this is more of something for their fans, for at least the diehard Saxon fans in general, on see if they would be able to at least appreciate and then give them a good idea on where their influences were and what made them want to pick up or want to either guitar, want to do singing, just write music in general, and probably also laid the groundwork for a lot of the early sound of their early material. Again, when they were beginning to be a part of that sort of new wave or British heavy metal movement with like the debut 1979 album and Wheels of Steel and Strong Arm of the Law and Denim and Leather and Crusader, you know, where their influences and where those sounds of those songs on those classic albums really were drawn from to begin with. So this was as a way to kind of give the listener and take them through a journey through their time period. So this was one of the main reasons. So that's kind of the whole, that's the way I take it. And I think it was meant as that way to begin with. But at the same time, when it comes to covers albums, especially when it comes to classic metal bands like Saxon, sometimes if they're going to pick classic songs from a lot of classic rock bands to begin with, the only thing that can be seen as a bit of a just a bit of a more of a curiosity, or even at times a little bit of a wondering if they're going to pick songs that have already been covered before. And that's usually the case with a lot of cover albums, and that's kind of the case with this one, because I mean, Painted Black has been covered plenty of times from most of the ones that I can think of right now is Anvil and Wasp have covered Painted Black. Immigrant Song is probably covered by countless of other bands. Dark Angel is one that comes to mind. And of course, Stone Free is probably covered by classic of other bands who obviously wanted to be Jimi Hendrix, so to speak. And Bomber's been covered by either Girl School and Onslaught. Speed King's been covered by Venom, Primal Fear, and so on. It's been covered. The Rocker, I think, has been covered by a few other bands, but right now I really can't think of any. Problem Child has been covered by countless of other bands too, but really not ones that I completely think of. If they were, it was mostly ones to add on to like tribute albums, or at least tribute to Acdc albums and so on. See, my friends from the Kinks, I don't know it has been covered before, but that's again, that's just my sort of knowledge at least showing, which is basically very limited. So at least take that with a bit of grain there when it comes to me talking about this. However, though, I know you're probably wondering why aren't you talking about Evil Woman? All right. Even before I really get into any of the positives I can really say about this, I do have to really point out a slight sort of at least I don't know what's the best word, I guess, just a little bit slight mishap, or just something that's a little bit taken a little differently. And that's it's their cover of the Crow's Evil Woman. On the artwork for this album, one of the really cool things about the cover art is that not just does it show a house, I'm wondering if could be Brockfield Hall, for all we know, could be, but around the outside of the house, we see all around here is a lot of, besides Saxon, showing all the band members there, we also got a lot of band members for, at least all the guys or so for, again, to represent the bands that as Saxon have covered here. One of them is Black Sabbath that's being shown here. Black Sabbath is being shown at least on the left side of this artwork, right behind the Beatles and so on. It could be the Kinks, for all I know, that are there. Again, you can feel to correct me on that. But again, for sure, Black Sabbath are behind there. While Black Sabbath is the only other band that has covered Evil Woman, it was featured, their cover of it was only featured on the European pressings of the very first Black Sabbath album, and eventually made onto some of the CD reissues and remasters of it. But because it was never published, at least the cover wasn't published here in the States, at least here in the United States, for all I know. Never did, at least back when it first came out. But it wasn't their song. They may have somewhat popularized the song, kind of like what Judas Priest did with the Green Manalishi, where everyone really thought it was a Judas Priest song, but it was a Fleetwood Mac song. So it's kind of the same sort of situation here with Evil Woman. It's Black Sabbath, they're being shown on the cover, but they didn't really come up with Evil Woman. It wasn't original of theirs. It was a Crow track. It was on their very first 1969 album. So it's a Crow cover. But the thing is, the basis of this cover is mostly structured after the Black Sabbath version. So it's a very similar situation with the Green Manalishi from Judas, because many people really, whenever a lot of metal bands cover the Green Manalishi, they're mostly judging, or at least basing their version, their structure of it on Judas Priest's version of the track and not the original Fleetwood Mac version. So it's kind of similar, even though it's not nearly as drastic, because the original version of Evil Woman from Crow is somewhat similar, has a similar structure, but the difference is there's like organs and some horns that are in that version. So it is, and it's a fine cover. I think Saxon does a fine job to, kind of giving it their sort of, that's giving their feel, their sort of personality, but at the same time, it's still somewhat based off a Black Sabbath version of this track. But it is a fine track. As far as other ones, their version of Painted Black is fine. I would say I've seen some reviews saying it's one of the worst covers on here. I don't know. I think the person who probably wrote that review is also very limited in terms of his knowledge, and mostly, I guess, has something personal. I don't know. Anyways, it's been covered countless of times from either, talking about, for example, like Anvil and Wasp. But I think it's a fine cover. Again, the only thing, if there's any knock on it, is the fact that, well, it's another cover of Painted Black. That's all. But I don't want to completely knock it. It's a fine track, and I think that they do a fine job giving it the Saxon treatment, so I like it. Immigrant Song, I think that they do a fine job covering it. I mean, again, it is Immigrant Song and Painted Black are arguably can be considered some of the basic structuring for a lot of metal. Surprisingly, again, I didn't really think of a Painted Black one. Again, I've heard the original for so many years, but when you hear the original, you don't really immediately think, oh yeah, that can definitely be turned into a metal track. It's got that same structuring. Not really. But when I heard Anvil covering it, and same goes for Wasp, I never really noticed that it has a bit of a galloping sort of pace to it. I never really realized about that. I know I'm starting to fuck up my words here, but, or at least my pronunciations. I'm having a little issues, I guess, talking. I don't know. But they do. It's got a bit of a galloping pace to it, and Saxon definitely just, again, they reevaluate that example very well. It definitely should show you that, yes, it actually is probably considered one of the earliest metal structures for at least any track that come out within that sort of 60s time period. Whereas Immigrant Song is immediately has a lot of the same sort of structurings for a sort of a metal song. Even if Led Zeppelin are trying as much to shy away, saying, I mean, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant, they don't want to be associated with the term heavy metal to begin with. However, the track Immigrant Song, even in 1970, it was a very galloping and very metallic sounding track that it really, if you added a lot of good, very heavy distortion to a lot of the guitar tones, it is a very much a early proto-metal track for 1970, and it really made it easy for a lot of other sort of metal bands to actually cover it, because it had that sort of basic structuring to it anyways for a track from 1970. So it's definitely a very easy song, and it was one of those that definitely showed where the roots of heavy metal came from, and where bands like Saxon really drew a lot of those inspirations from, and I know no pun intended, from which is probably, again, pun intended maybe. So it is a very easy track, even though it's been covered countless of times. I think Saxon does a fine job covering it, even if it is, they're not really adding anything else different to it, other than it's just Saxon covering it, and that's about it. And I think it's a fine cover. So it's innocent in most aspects, even if many people think it's egregious that they're covering again, Immigrant Song, which has been covered countless of other times. Third track up is Paperback Rider from the Beatles. Now, this is going to be a very rare thing for me to say, because you're never going to expect me to say this on any sort of album. I mean, but when it comes to a lot of bands covering a lot of Beatles songs, there's some songs that some bands do fine. I mean, the only sort of knock I probably would have given this would be, well, it's another Beatles cover, basically. Because again, how many times has Eleanor Rigby has been covered? How many times people have covered Come Together? Or Hey Jude or whatnot? You know, there's... It seems it was almost a bit of a black mark almost to kind of think, because it's like, oh boy, another Beatles cover. How many times are a lot of these bands going to cover another Beatles track? There was a point to me where I felt like it's become almost a little overdriven. It's too overdosed at this point for anyone to cover another Beatles track. But the thing is, I've never really heard Paperback Rider as much as I've heard the songs I've already mentioned. Because I mean, Helter Skelter, yes. That's probably the only sort of good cover I really like, at least of any band that has ever covered from the Beatles. I mean, Motley Crue really just is the one that comes to mind. Of course, even Gillan covered it as well. But Paperback Rider is one of those kind of... It's not a deep cut, but it's a bit of a lesser track that you expect a lot of these classic, at least when it comes to even the realms of hard rock, that doesn't much cover. But that's just at least my knowledge kind of showing, because of, again, I don't really search out a lot of bands that are covering Beatles tracks, because I'm not the biggest Beatles fan. But I'm going to admit, Saxon does a very cool version of Paperback Rider. They do a very great version. If anything, this might be one of the highlights for me on this album to begin with. They definitely give it the Saxon treatment, and it works. I think Saxon found a way to where it was easy for them to work with it. It's a very guitar-driven track, even for at least something that came out in the mid-60s. Actually had a very rockin' feel, and again, kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of inspirations for a lot of other classic hard rock bands that come out in the 1970s. I mean, Acdc is another one that could come to mind, and I'll get to that too. So it's a fine cover. Stone Free, they do a fine job covering it. Again, it's another highlight, I would say, for this one. And I've always liked Stone Free. It was probably one of my personal favorite songs from Jimi Hendrix to begin with. But I think Saxon does a great way of really making it a little heavier. They really heavy up this track, and I think they do a fine job doing it. Bomber, it's just another solid cover of another solid track. Again, this more was seen, I think Saxon doing this was seen as more of another saying of thank you to at least Motorhead. It's another tribute to Motorhead in some cases as well. I mean, Saxon opened up for Motorhead on the Bomber tour as well. They the friendship and so on. At this point, it seems like they can't get enough of just saying thank you to at least somebody who helped bring them the light, who helped them. So that's the way I see it. So it's another good cover here, and again, there's a lot of at least some sort of, again, just a nostalgic feel, and it's very reminiscent. It's just got a nice feel to it, and it's great. And again, it warms my heart. Speed King, again, it's another cover of it, but Saxon does a fine job of doing Speed King. I mean, how can you? Again, just like Immigrant Song, it is one of the earliest proto-metal songs. At times even laying the groundwork for speed metal as well in 1970. So it's another great track. The Rocker, it is another good, again, I think this one is, I mean, Saxon, we're doing either tours with Thin Lizzy as well back then, but they were, again, along with Deep Purple and either Budgie and Black Sabbath and just so on, were one of the early, and UFO also, can't forget about them, were one of the earliest proto-metal bands, or some of the earliest heavy bands to come out, at least there, even though some say might find some disagreements with that, but Thin Lizzy did have a very metallic feel to them to begin with. And the Rocker may not be seen as way, but it does. A lot of new wave British heavy metal bands took a lot of inspiration from Thin Lizzy, and you definitely can hear it in a track like The Rocker, which is a personal favorite song of mine. I always liked the track to begin with. So again, it's very cool that Saxon are covering it. Other ones that I should talk about, again, Acdc's Problem Child. This is one of those that seemed to be really up Saxon's alley. It was probably the easiest one for them to pick. Why? If you listen to some of those early Saxon albums, you can't tell me that you're not hearing any sort of influence from Acdc. The Acdc's influence was definitely found throughout most of those early Saxon albums to begin with. So it definitely was very easy for them to pick. Just like picking Motorhead, for example. It was very easy. So, and the next up, ending would be See My Friends from the Kinks, which is a fine track. It's very, again, when you're picking, let's say, songs to cover from, like the Kinks, for example, You Really Got Me has been covered countless of times. There's a few other ones I'm thinking of too. There's the one song already, I'm already forgetting about, but Praying Mantis had covered it too on Time Does Not Heal album. So that's ones I'm kind of thinking of, but there's still plenty of songs there that hasn't been covered, and I think See My Friends might be one of those songs that probably hasn't been covered countless of times. So I think that they do a fine job. All right, it's fine. So, but there's still a few other songs that I've also haven't talked about. Again, I've already talked about their cover of Crow's Evil Woman. What's missing here is Hold the Line from Toto. This one, when I first saw the track listing for this album, I was a little bit very skeptical, and it really kind of took me back a little bit. I was kind of like, why? Why are they covering that? Not that I don't think it's a completely terrible track, but it just seemed a little bit odd that, again, a band like Saxon, again, one of the earliest heavy metal bands of the new wave of British heavy metal movement, are covering more of a radio AOR rock station staple. I mean, Hold the Line's has been played a lot. I mean, that was actually how I found about Toto to begin with, was because of hearing Hold the Line. It was actually in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, alright? So, I heard it so many times growing up to a point where I ended up kind of getting sick and tired of it. So, I was a little bit like, why? Why are they covering it? But I do have to kind of give some points to it. I think Saxon does a good, decent job of at least giving it their personality, or giving it their feel. They're giving it their personality, like I'm saying. All right, it's a fine cover. That's all I gotta say. They actually do a decent job of it. I don't know if it's my favorite cover here on the album, but again, they do a decent job of doing it. I really can't say anything else. I mean, Saxon did cover, of course, Ride Like the Wind on Destiny, so whatever, the Christopher Cross covers. So they do somehow can pick some kind of oddball kind of tracks to cover. And again, I consider Hold the Line kind of an oddball because of it's not, again, when you're looking at some of the bands here, Acdc, Thin Lizzy, Deep Purple, Motorhead, even Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, and the Rolling Stones. They're kind of easy ones for a lot of metal bands to almost cover in some cases, especially even in the realms of hard rock. They're easy ones. But Toto, I don't know. But they somehow managed to make it work, and it was probably the easiest one they could have chosen anyways. I mean, I'm glad they didn't pick Africa. God damn, I didn't. That's probably one Toto song I don't want to hear a metal band actually cover. I'm sorry, I don't want to. Ooh. Either way, there you go. There it is. There is my review of Inspirations from Saxon, and my rating, it's a 8.95 out of 10. I mean, I didn't really expect to enjoy this as much as I did, and well, I ended up. Again, it's not really, here's the thing. This isn't going to be an essential album from Saxon. It is mostly really geared towards a lot of diehard fans who might appreciate this. That's all. But if you're looking for a album, if you really like covers albums, you may not really as much care for this. You might like some aspects of this, but you may not. Again, it's a metal band giving their sort of at least takes on some mostly radio classic rock tracks in some cases, though Problem Child barely gets played on the radio. I've never really heard that track get played as much when I was living in Fresno. It was mostly either Highway to Hell or Back in Black or whatnot, or For Those About to Rock. So it's really one of those, again, you could have almost picked any sort of song off of Dunder D's Dunder Cheap, because of there's actually some more deeper cuts on that album than many seem to really give it, because of there's barely a whole lot of songs there that I don't see a whole lot of bands cover. Like, for example, Ain't No Fun Running Around to Be a Millionaire. I've never seen a whole lot of bands actually cover that Acdc track, and that would have been also an easy one as well. But they chose Problem Child, which is one of my personal favorite Acdc songs off that album, so that's about it. If you like Saxon and you do somewhat enjoy covers albums and want to check this one out, you might like this one. But if you haven't really listened to any sort of Saxon albums or whatnot, I mean, I'm not going to tell you that this would be a good way to start with. Again, you probably should never really start with a covers album from any band. You really shouldn't. But an example, this is a fine album to begin with. So there you go. It's all right. And again, for me personally, I didn't expect to enjoy this one as much as I did, but I did, and I think I like it. I like it quite a bit. There you go. I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Thresh Sam out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone, and Saxon did a pretty decent job with this one. I'll see you all next week. Take care, everyone.